Victoria Harrington had everything: money, status, power. But when she invited her maid Sophia to her elite birthday gala as a cruel joke, she never expected the night to turn against her. Because Sophia carried a secret, one that would leave Victoria humiliated, exposed, and questioning everything she believed. The Harrington estate was more than just a mansion. It was a monument to wealth and excess. Nestled on the city's highest hill, its modern glass and marble facade shimmered under the morning sun, standing as a silent declaration of power. From its sprawling balconies, one could see the entire skyline, a kingdom Victoria Harrington ruled without ever needing to leave her home. Inside, everything was polished to perfection. Crystal chandeliers, rare Persian rugs, and priceless artwork filled the vast hallways. Each corner of the estate whispered of money, not just wealth but generational power that few could ever touch. And at the heart of it all stood Victoria. She was 25 years old, heir to the Harrington fortune, and utterly untouchable. Every inch of her was curated, from the platinum blonde waves cascading down her back to the perfectly tailored silk robe draped over her frame. She had been raised to be flawless, a reflection of the family name, a symbol of status that could never be questioned. And yet, as she stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling window in her bedroom, her icy blue eyes weren't focused on her world of luxury. They were focused on her. Down in the manicured gardens, Sophia moved with effortless grace, tending to the vibrant red roses that lined the estate's grand walkway. The morning sun bathed her skin in golden light, illuminating the delicate sheen of sweat on her brow. She had been working for the Harringtons for nearly 5 years. A maid, a gardener, a caretaker, whatever role needed filling, she stepped into without complaint. But Victoria didn't watch her because of her work ethic. No, what unsettled her was the way Sophia carried herself. Unlike the elite women in Victoria's social circles, Sophia wore no designer labels, no jewels, no expensive perfume. She didn't have the privileges that came with money, the effortless refinement that came from wealth. And yet somehow she was beautiful, not the forced artificial beauty of high society, where cosmetic procedures and designer couture reigned supreme. Sophia's beauty was natural, effortless, unfair, and worse than that, she was content. Victoria took a slow sip of her vintage Cabernet Sauvignon, the deep red liquid swirling in the glass like liquid wealth. How could someone who had nothing, no power, no money, no influence, walk through life so unbothered? Victoria had everything. The latest fashions, the most exclusive invitations, the power to buy whatever she desired. And yet she never felt satisfied. A cold bitterness tightened in her chest as she watched Sophia pause to brush a loose strand of hair from her face. Victoria had spent her entire life perfecting her image. She knew what it took to be admired, to be envied, to stand above everyone else. Sophia did none of those things, yet she still drew attention. Victoria had noticed it before, the way some of the estate's staff smiled more warmly at Sophia, the way even her father had once offhandedly commented on the girl's elegance. It was infuriating. She tightened her grip around the glass, the cool stem pressing into her palm. Then an idea crept into her mind. At first it was just a whisper, a fleeting thought. But as she continued to watch Sophia work, completely unaware of the storm brewing above her, the idea solidified into something far more sinister. A game, a lesson, a way to remind everyone, especially Sophia, that no matter how naturally beautiful, hard-working, or kind she was, she would always be beneath Victoria Harrington. Victoria's birthday gala was approaching. Every year it was an event of unmatched prestige, a night of wealth, influence, and spectacle, where the city's elite gathered to bask in their own opulence. This year, she would extend an invitation to Sophia, not as an equal, not even as a guest, but as a spectacle, a pawn in Victoria's cruel joke. She could already picture it. Sophia, dressed in something hideous and ill-fitting, stepping into a world where she didn't belong. She could hear the whispered laughter, the amused glances, the way the city's richest would devour the scene like a pack of wolves. Yes, this would be Victoria's masterpiece, a public humiliation so perfect it would be talked about for months. A slow smirk spread across Victoria's lips as she set her glass down. It was time to put her plan in motion. She turned from the window, her silk robe trailing behind her like the cloak of a queen stepping into battle. The game had begun, and Sophia would never see it coming. Victoria rarely left things to chance. She had been raised in a world where power and control were everything, where people were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard, and she had mastered the game. And tonight, she would set her next move into motion. By the time Victoria stepped outside, the heat of the day had begun to settle into a comfortable warmth. The sun cast long golden streaks across the manicured gardens, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. Sophia was still working, her hands carefully tending to a row of white lilies. She didn't hear Victoria approach. Victoria paused for a moment, watching her. She could almost admire Sophia's dedication. Almost. She cleared her throat, making her presence known. Sophia turned, blinking in surprise before quickly wiping her hands on her apron. "Miss Victoria," she said, offering a warm, genuine smile. "I didn't see you there." Victoria tilted her head slightly, feigning warmth in return. "I've been watching you, Sophia," she said smoothly, folding her arms. "And I must say, I'm impressed." Sophia's eyes widened, and Victoria could practically see the mixture of surprise and quiet pride flicker across her face. You are?" Sophia asked hesitantly. Victoria nodded, keeping her expression perfectly composed. "Of course. You're diligent, hard-working, and after all these years, I think it's time I reward that." Sophia frowned slightly, as if unsure what to make of this sudden generosity. Victoria smiled, a carefully practiced, polished expression. "I want you to be my guest of honor at my birthday gala this Saturday." Sophia froze. The words seemed almost too strange to process. "Me?" she asked, the disbelief clear in her voice. Victoria laughed lightly, as if the idea of Sophia doubting her own worth was absurd. "Why not? You've worked for my family for years. You deserve to see how the other half lives, and I'd love for you to experience it." She watched as Sophia struggled to form words. "Oh, Miss Victoria, I don't know what to say. That's so kind of you, but—" She looked down at her uniform, the simple, well-worn fabric that had been her daily attire for as long as she could remember. "I don't have anything to wear to an event like that," she admitted softly. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about that, I'll take care of everything." Victoria spent the next several hours meticulously planning. She didn't want Sophia's humiliation to be subtle. No, she wanted a spectacle. Something the guests would talk about for months. And the key to it all? The dress. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant, Chloe. Chloe answered on the second ring. "Miss Victoria?" "I need you to find something for me," Victoria said, leaning back against her velvet chaise lounge, sipping a fresh glass of wine. "Of course, what are you looking for?" Victoria's lips curled into a slow smile. "A dress. Something for my maid." There was a pause. Even Chloe, who rarely questioned Victoria's orders, seemed surprised. "For your maid?" "Yes," Victoria said, swirling her wine in its crystal glass. "It needs to be memorable." Chloe hesitated. "What kind of memorable?" "The wrong kind," Victoria said, amusement lacing her voice. Chloe seemed to understand instantly. "I see. Something extravagant?" "Something garish," Victoria corrected. "Something that doesn't belong at a high-class event. Make it oversized. Something that will make heads turn for all the wrong reasons." Another pause, and then Chloe exhaled. "I'll find something." Victoria's smirk widened. "Good. And make sure it's delivered the night before the gala. I want it to be a surprise." Chloe gave a soft, "Understood, Miss Victoria." Victoria hung up the phone, setting it down beside her. The plan was in motion. She could already picture it. Sophia, stepping into the ballroom, drowned in an absurd, ill-fitting gown, standing out in a crowd of perfectly dressed elite. The laughter, the whispers, the stares. It would be exquisite. She took another slow sip of her wine, the taste rich and expensive against her tongue. This birthday was going to be one for the books. Sophia's quiet doubts. Meanwhile, Sophia sat in her small room, staring at the invitation in her hands. Something about this felt strange. Victoria had never acknowledged her beyond simple commands and formalities. Why now? Why would she suddenly invite her to a gala meant for millionaires and high society? For a brief moment she hesitated. But then she thought of how rare opportunities like this were. She had spent her entire life working, always on the outside of the wealthy world she served. Maybe Victoria really was being kind. Maybe this was a chance to step into a different world, even if just for one night. Sophia took a deep breath and smiled softly to herself. Whatever happened, she would make the best of it. She didn't know that she was walking straight into a trap. The evening of the gala arrived and the city was alive with light and luxury. The grand Harrington estate, now transformed into an opulent venue, stood as a beacon of extravagance against the night sky. Every detail had been meticulously arranged: gold-trimmed chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and a grand red carpet leading into the ballroom. It was the kind of event that made headlines. And at the center of it all was Victoria Harrington. She stood in front of her full-length mirror, admiring her reflection, a vision of wealth and power. Her deep emerald gown, custom-designed in Paris, hugged her figure perfectly, and every shimmering jewel on her wrist and neck was a symbol of her status, her control. Tonight was not just about her birthday, it was about her dominance, and in just a few minutes her carefully laid plan would unfold. Meanwhile, in a much smaller, dimly lit room at the back of the estate, Sophia stood in front of an old mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the dress she had been given. She had been excited, nervous but excited, when a beautifully wrapped package arrived for her earlier that day. Inside was the gown Victoria had promised, and for a fleeting moment she had thought, maybe she truly meant for me to belong tonight. But when she pulled the dress from the box, her heart had sunk. It was a monstrosity, a garish, oversized mess of fabric, bright green with absurdly puffy sleeves, drowning her small frame in waves of fabric that swayed awkwardly around her. It was a dress that did not belong in a high-class gala. The realization had hit her like a slap. But by then, it was too late. She had already told Victoria she would come. She had already imagined what the night might be like, what it might feel like to stand among the wealthy, to experience their world, if just for a single night. And now, she had no other choice but to go. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her chin and told herself that it didn't matter what she wore. I will go with dignity. I will not let this night define me. When the sleek Rolls-Royce arrived to take her to the venue, Sophia stepped inside, her hands clutching her lap, her heart racing. Beside her, Victoria barely contained her laughter. You look stunning, she said, her voice dripping with false admiration. Sophia, ever humble, offered a small smile. Thank you, Miss Victoria. I just hope I don't embarrass you. Victoria smirked. Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. As the car sped toward the grand ballroom, Victoria's excitement grew. This was going to be a night to remember. The moment Sophia stepped out of the car, the world seemed to stop. Cameras flashed. A hush fell over the guests as all eyes turned to the woman in the absurdly oversized green dress. At first there was confusion. Then came the whispers. Then the laughter. It started softly, just a chuckle from one guest, a stifled giggle from another. But soon the amusement spread like wildfire. Who is that? Someone whispered. Did she come from a costume party? My God, what is she wearing? Sophia felt the weight of their stares, felt the burning heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. She suddenly felt exposed, as though she had walked into a battlefield unarmed. Beside her, Victoria beamed. She reached out, placing a hand on Sophia's back in a show of fake support. Everyone, she announced loudly, her voice dripping with faux affection. Please welcome my very special guest, Sophia Morales. A ripple of polite but mocking applause spread through the room. Sophia's stomach tightened. She had no idea what she had just walked into. Victoria led Sophia deeper into the lion's den. The room glittered with wealth, men in finely tailored suits, women draped in designer gowns, the scent of expensive perfume and aged wine filling the air. It was a world Sophia had only ever observed from the outside. And now she was right in the middle of it. But she was not welcome. Victoria introduced her to small groups of guests, each conversation more condescending than the last. So, Sophia, said a wealthy socialite with a champagne flute in hand, tell us, how does it feel to be here among all of this? Sophia swallowed, trying to ignore the smirks surrounding her. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "The lights, the music, the people, everything is so elegant." Victoria bit back a laugh. "Oh, Sophia, you're too sweet," she said, tilting her head as if speaking to a child. Another guest chimed in. "And tell me, darling, what do you do for fun? I assume gardening must be quite the thrill?" A wave of chuckles rippled through the circle. Sophia stiffened. There was something in their smiles, something cruel, something wrong. And suddenly she knew. She finally understood. This was never meant to be a kind invitation. This was never about letting her experience their world. It was a joke, a game, and she was the punchline. Sophia felt a deep, sharp sting in her chest, a pain that went beyond embarrassment. She had trusted Victoria. She had allowed herself to believe for just one night that she could step into a world that wasn't hers. And now, she saw it for what it really was. Her hands trembled as she held the glass of water a waiter had handed her. She wanted to leave, to disappear. But then, something unexpected happened. A murmur spread through the room. The atmosphere shifted, and suddenly, the laughter stopped. Sophia followed the direction of their gazes, and her heart nearly stilled. At the entrance of the ballroom stood an elderly man in a finely tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his presence radiating power. The legendary Alfred Sinclair, the most respected investor and philanthropist in the country, a man who could turn a nobody into a billionaire with a single word. And he was looking directly at Sophia. Then, in a moment that silenced the entire room, he smiled, then extended his hand. The grand ballroom, once buzzing with laughter and whispers, fell silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the chandelier lights above, their golden glow casting shadows across the polished marble floors. All eyes were on one man. Alfred Sinclair stood at the entrance, his imposing yet distinguished presence commanding the room. A legendary figure in the business world, he was known not only for his vast wealth but for his unwavering principles, his keen eye for talent, and his deep respect for character over status. He had built empires, shaped industries, and sat at the helm of philanthropy projects that had changed countless lives. And now, he stood there, looking directly at Sophia Morales. The woman Victoria Harrington had dragged into this party as a joke. The woman Victoria had expected to be a source of entertainment, a spectacle. Instead, the power dynamic of the night shifted in an instant. Victoria's growing dread. Victoria, who had been basking in her cruel triumph only minutes ago, felt her heart slam against her ribs. Her carefully planned game had just taken a turn she had not anticipated. Why is he looking at her? The question echoed in her mind, but there was no time to answer it. Because before she could process what was happening, Alfred Sinclair began walking toward them. Sophia, who had spent the evening trying to endure the humiliation, was stunned as Alfred approached. His steps were slow but purposeful, his piercing blue eyes never leaving hers. And then, he stopped right in front of her. The room was frozen. People held their breath. And in the kind of moment that only happened in movies, Alfred extended his hand. "Miss Morales," he said, his deep, commanding voice filling the air, "it is truly an honor to meet you." Sophia blinked, completely lost. What? The tension in the room was palpable. The same people who had laughed at her minutes ago were now watching with wide eyes, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion, and then to shock. Sophia hesitated for a brief second before cautiously placing her hand in his. His grip was firm, not the polite or insincere kind she had felt from others tonight. It was the handshake of someone who recognized her, someone who knew her worth. But how? She had never met this man before. Had she? The murmurs begin. A ripple of hushed whispers spread through the crowd. Why is Alfred Sinclair talking to her? Does he know her? Wait, look at his face. That's respect. Victoria's throat went dry. Her perfectly orchestrated humiliation of Sophia was falling apart in front of her. The guests, who had laughed along with her mockery, were now shifting uncomfortably. Even those who had delighted in Sophia's discomfort were now wondering if they had made a grave mistake. And then, the words that changed everything. "I never thought I'd meet the unknown angel in person. Alfred said, his voice rich with admiration. "But tonight it seems I finally have." Silence. Utter. Stunned. Silence. The moment those words left Alfred's lips, the reaction was immediate. Gasps, heads turning, eyes widening. Someone dropped their champagne glass, the crystal shattering against the floor, though no one seemed to care. Victoria's vision blurred. She had just heard the name. The name whispered in elite circles. The name rumored among the wealthiest and most powerful individuals. The unknown angel, a mysterious philanthropist who had spent years funding charities, rebuilding communities, and helping struggling families, all without ever revealing their identity. Millions of dollars had been donated under this name. No one knew who it was. No one had ever seen their face. Until now, until tonight, until Sofia Morales. Sofia, who had spent her entire life avoiding the spotlight, suddenly found herself drowning in it. She had never wanted recognition. That was why she had kept her donations anonymous for so many years. She didn't do it for fame. She didn't do it for praise. She had done it because it was the right thing to do. Because while people like Victoria flaunted their wealth to elevate themselves, Sofia had used hers to help people, to change lives. And now, everyone knew. She took a deep breath, glancing around at the stunned faces, realizing that there was no going back. Victoria's fall. Victoria felt like she was sinking. The people she had so desperately tried to impress were no longer looking at her. No one was amused by her antics anymore. No one was laughing. Instead, they were looking at Sofia, the woman she had brought here to humiliate, with something Victoria had never seen directed at her before. Deep, genuine, undeniable respect. And when Sofia finally spoke, her voice was calm, unwavering, and filled with quiet power. "I never wanted recognition," she said. "I just wanted to help." Her words hung in the air like a lesson carved into stone. Alfred nodded, his expression warm. "And that," he said, turning to the crowd, "is true wealth." The shift in the room, and just like that, Victoria lost. Her carefully curated social standing, her control over the night, her power in this moment, gone. The same guests who had laughed at Sofia earlier were now tripping over themselves to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her how much she had inspired them. Victoria, standing in the middle of the chaos she had created, felt her world crumbling around her. She had made Sofia the center of attention, but not in the way she had planned, not as a joke, not as a spectacle, but as a legend. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington felt truly invisible. The grand ballroom, which had been a battleground of wealth and cruelty, was now a stage for truth and reckoning. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The conversations that once carried hints of mockery had faded into stunned disbelief. Everyone's attention was locked on Sofia Morales, the woman they had dismissed, the woman they had laughed at, the woman they had seen as nothing more than a maid. But now they knew. Sofia was not just a maid. She was the unknown angel. The whispers started slowly, hushed voices carrying waves of realization across the room. "Is this real? No way, it can't be her. The unknown angel? I've heard of them. I thought it was a myth." The confusion swirled through the crowd, but it was met with a single, undeniable truth. Alfred Sinclair, the most respected figure in the room, had spoken. And Alfred Sinclair was never wrong. Across the ballroom, Victoria Harrington stood frozen. Her world, the one built on power, manipulation, and the art of spectacle, was collapsing before her eyes. This was supposed to be her night, her party, her grand display of wealth and influence. Instead, it had become Sofia's night. The woman she had sought to humiliate was now the most admired person in the room. And Victoria? She had been reduced to a mere spectator. She felt the shift. She saw how people moved past her, no longer interested in the heiress who had once commanded their attention. She heard the whispers, the same whispers that had once been directed at Sofia. "I can't believe Victoria tried to embarrass her. How shallow can someone be? She played herself. This is humiliating." Victoria's throat was dry, her chest tight. The feeling that settled in her stomach was unfamiliar. Shame. Alfred Sinclair stepped forward, the room parting for him as if he were a king among peasants. He made his way toward the center of the ballroom, where a microphone stood, untouched for most of the night. The legendary businessman turned toward Sophia, his eyes filled with admiration. "For years," he began, "the world has spoken of the unknown angel, a person who has given time and time again, expecting nothing in return, a person whose generosity has changed lives, lifted communities, and restored hope where there was none." The audience hung on every word. Victoria's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to stop this, to take back control, but there was nothing she could do. Alfred turned to the crowd, his voice deep and unwavering. "And tonight we learn that this incredible person has been standing among us all along." He extended his hand toward Sophia. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Sophia Morales, the woman you overlooked, the woman some of you ridiculed, and the woman who, despite everything, has shown more grace and generosity than most of us ever could." A beat of silence and then, thunderous, deafening, unstoppable. It began with a single clap, then another, then dozens. Soon the entire ballroom erupted in applause, the sound cascading like a wave of recognition. The same people who had looked down on her now stood in awe. Some even rose to their feet, clapping with genuine admiration. Victoria felt small, the guests reckoning. The applause wasn't just for Sophia, it was for the truth. And with that truth came a reckoning. The billionaires, the socialites, the executives, each of them had spent the evening mocking Sophia, treating her as an outsider, as lesser. And now, they were ashamed. Some looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Others rushed forward to shake her hand, eager to undo the damage they had done. Victoria watched as powerful men and women, people she had spent her entire life trying to impress, suddenly saw Sophia as their equal. Not just their equal, their better. A woman they should have admired from the start. Sophia stood in the center of the storm of praise, her expression unreadable. She had never wanted recognition. She had never asked for this moment. But now that it was here, she would use it well. She took a deep breath, her voice steady and clear as she addressed the crowd. "I never cared for titles," she said. "I never needed acknowledgement. I gave because I could, because I believe that wealth is not about how much we have, but how much we are willing to share." The room fell into silence once more, but this time it was a respectful silence. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt something she had never truly experienced. Defeat. Not just defeat. Irrelevance. She had spent her years believing she was above others, believing that her money, her influence, and her family name gave her power. But none of that mattered now. Because tonight the real power belonged to Sophia. Not because of her wealth. Not because of her status. But because of who she was. And Victoria? She had nothing left but the bitter taste of regret. The energy in the grand ballroom had shifted entirely. Where once there had been laughter at Sophia's expense, now there was awe. Where once there had been mockery, now there was admiration. The same people who had whispered cruel jokes about her were now leaning forward, eager to shake her hand. The realization had hit them all at once. They had underestimated her. Not just underestimated. They had insulted, dismissed, and ridiculed one of the most influential and generous people in the room. And now, they were ashamed. Business leaders, tech moguls, and socialites who had spent the night ignoring Sophia now flocked to her, desperate to correct their mistake. They wanted to align themselves with her, to bask in her presence, to erase their guilt with empty compliments. "Sophia, I had no idea," one woman gushed, grasping Sophia's hand tightly. "Your generosity has changed so many lives." "You've done remarkable work," another businessman said, forcing a smile. "I'd love to collaborate with you in the future." "It's an honor to finally meet you," a celebrity chimed in, eyes shining with calculated admiration. But Sophia saw right through them. She wasn't naive. She knew these people, people like Victoria, valued reputation over integrity, status over sincerity. They weren't apologizing because they had learned their lesson. They were apologizing because they had been caught. Sophia simply smiled, offering a polite but distant nod. She had no interest in playing their games. Across the room, Victoria Harrington stood frozen, watching everything unfold. This was supposed to be her night, her party, her moment to remind everyone who held the most power in the room. And yet, here she was, powerless. She couldn't comprehend it. For years she had believed that money dictated worth, that the wealthier you were, the more valuable you became. And yet Sophia, a woman she had treated as a joke, had just proven her wrong. Victoria felt the whispers shift toward her. She saw how people glanced in her direction, their expressions shifting from admiration to quiet judgment. She could almost hear them in the back of her mind. Victoria must be humiliated. She planned to embarrass Sophia, and now she's the one who looks like a fool. It's poetic justice, really. The same people who had worshipped her presence now avoided her gaze. For the first time in her life, Victoria was irrelevant. She felt her stomach twist, her hands trembling slightly as she clenched them into fists. She wouldn't accept this. She couldn't. Desperate to reclaim some semblance of control, she pushed through the crowd and stormed toward Sophia. Sophia was still speaking with Alfred Sinclair when Victoria grabbed her wrist, spinning her around. The entire room fell silent once more. Eyes darted toward them, anticipating yet another dramatic revelation. Sophia met Victoria's wild, desperate gaze with calm indifference. For the first time, Victoria wasn't the one in control, and she hated it. Why? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper, her breath unsteady. Why would you do this? Sophia's expression remained serene, unshaken. Do what exactly? She asked, her voice steady. Victoria swallowed the lump in her throat. Why work as a maid if you have money? Her voice cracked slightly as she spat the words out. Why put up with everything people like me have done to you? Sophia exhaled softly, tilting her head slightly. And then, with grace and patience, she gave Victoria the answer that would change her forever. Because wealth doesn't define a person, Victoria. Character does. The words cut deeper than any insult ever could. Victoria staggered back slightly, as if Sophia had physically struck her. Because she knew, deep down, she knew Sophia was right. She had spent her entire life believing that power came from money, that being rich made her better than everyone else. That luxury was a substitute for kindness, for meaning, for purpose. But Sophia had just shattered that illusion. Alfred Sinclair, who had been watching the exchange quietly, finally stepped forward. His voice, though soft, carried a weight that silenced the room. You've made a terrible mistake tonight, Victoria. Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, her pulse hammering in her ears. But, he continued, the greatest lessons often come from our greatest failures. She lifted her gaze, staring at him with wide, broken eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever dared to correct her, to hold her accountable. And yet, in this moment, she knew that Alfred was not trying to humiliate her. He was trying to save her. Victoria swallowed hard. For the first time in her life, she had no words, no excuses, and no defense. Just silence. The fall of a queen. The guests were still watching, still whispering, still judging. But Victoria no longer cared. She felt like she was standing at a crossroads, staring down two paths. One path would allow her to cling to her pride, to dismiss everything she had seen tonight, to pretend that Sophia didn't matter, to pretend that this night never happened. But the other path, the harder one, was a path toward change, a path toward growth, toward something real. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She knew what she had to do. But could she? Could she really admit that her entire life had been built on the wrong foundation? Could she let go of the person she had always been and try to become someone better? The thought terrified her. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "It's never too late." Victoria lowered her gaze, feeling smaller than she ever had before. For the first time in her life, she realized she had so much to learn. Victoria Harrington had spent her entire life at the top. She was untouchable, adored, feared. Or at least that's what she had believed. But tonight was different. The power she once wielded over the room had vanished. The same people who had fought for her attention, who had praised her extravagance, now looked at her with quiet judgment, some even with pity. She had been raised to believe that status was everything, that money dictated who was worthy of respect, that humiliating someone weaker made you stronger. And yet, here was Sophia, a woman Victoria had looked down upon, a woman she had ridiculed, set up for humiliation. And somehow it was Sophia standing victorious. Victoria had all the wealth in the world, yet in this moment she felt poor. Not financially, but morally. She felt empty, as if everything she had ever known had crumbled around her, leaving only the cold truth in its place. She wasn't stronger than Sophia. She wasn't better than Sophia. In fact, she wasn't even close. Facing the one she wronged. Victoria knew she had two choices. She could cling to her pride, brush off the humiliation, and pretend that none of this had happened, or dash. She could face the truth. Face Sophia. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Then, for the first time that evening, she walked toward Sophia, not with arrogance, but with uncertainty. Sophia was speaking with a small group of philanthropists, but as Victoria approached, she stopped mid-sentence. The entire group fell silent. The air between them was thick with tension. Victoria hesitated, her fingers tightening into fists at her sides. This was harder than she had expected, but she forced herself to speak. Sophia. The woman before her regarded her with calm, patient eyes. The same eyes that had looked at her with humility earlier that evening. The same eyes Victoria had mocked. Sophia tilted her head slightly. Yes? The word was simple, but it held power. Victoria swallowed hard. She had spent years commanding respect, receiving apologies, not giving them. But she knew, if she wanted to change, she had to start here. She hesitated, her voice faltering. Sophia waited. The people around them waited. Victoria exhaled sharply, lowering her gaze. I'm sorry. The words felt foreign on her tongue. She barely recognized her own voice, but she had said it. Finally. Sophia's expression didn't change. She simply studied Victoria for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of her words. For what exactly? Sophia asked softly. Victoria felt the weight of the question. She couldn't just say for everything and expect it to be enough. She had to own what she had done. For what I did to you, Victoria admitted, her voice quieter now. For inviting you here as a joke, for humiliating you, for thinking I was better than you. The words tasted bitter, but for the first time, they felt real. Sophia studied her for another long moment. Then, she did something Victoria hadn't expected. She smiled. It wasn't the sharp, victorious smile Victoria had expected to see from someone who had won. It was gentle, compassionate. I accept your apology, Victoria. Victoria blinked, feeling a strange tightness in her chest. That was it? No anger, no smugness, no satisfaction, just forgiveness? She felt unworthy of it. Why? She blurted out before she could stop herself. Sophia tilted her head. Why what? Why would you forgive me after everything I did to you? Sophia let out a soft breath. Because I know what it's like to be lost, she said simply. And because I believe people can change. Victoria felt something deep inside her shift. For years she had been taught that power was in control, in cruelty, in winning at any cost. But now she saw, real power was in kindness, and Sophia was the strongest person in the room. From the corner of the room, Alfred Sinclair had been watching. He stepped forward now, his presence as commanding as ever. Victoria. She turned, standing straighter, preparing for whatever judgment he would deliver. Tonight you learned a lesson most people never do. His voice was calm yet firm. Money doesn't make you powerful. It doesn't make you important. It only reveals who you already are. Victoria lowered her gaze. You've spent your life chasing the illusion of power, Alfred continued. But I have to ask you, now that you see the truth, what will you do with it? Victoria hesitated. She had never been given a choice before. She had always followed in the footsteps of her parents, playing the role of the untouchable heiress, believing that was the only path for her. But now for the first time she saw another way. She looked at Sophia, then back at Alfred, and then, finally, at herself. I want to change, she said softly. It wasn't just words. It was a promise. Alfred nodded slowly. Then start today. Sophia's gentle smile returned. It's never too late, Victoria. For the first time that night, Victoria believed it, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being seen as weak. because now she knew. There was strength in humility, and she was finally ready to embrace it. For the first time in her life, Victoria Harrington woke up without feeling invincible. The events of the night before lingered in her mind like a storm that had passed but left behind its wreckage. She had spent years believing she was superior, untouchable, and feared rather than loved. But last night, everything changed. She had fallen. And strangely, as painful as it didn't feel like the end. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new. As Victoria sat in her grand, sunlit kitchen, stirring a cup of black coffee she barely had the energy to drink, the doorbell rang. Her maid, one of the few who had not quit after last night's disaster, moved to answer it. Moments later, Sophia Morales stood at the entrance. Victoria stiffened. She hadn't expected to see her again so soon. Sophia, dressed in her usual simple yet graceful manner, carried the same gentle authority she had the night before. "I hope I'm not intruding," Sophia said, offering a small smile. Victoria hesitated, then shook her head. "No, please come in." Sophia stepped inside, looking around. The mansion, as always, was pristine, but for the first time Victoria saw it through different eyes. Everything was cold, lifeless, unlike the warmth Sophia carried within herself, despite having far less in material wealth. Victoria gestured toward the kitchen table where she had barely touched her coffee. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked awkwardly. Sophia chuckled. "It's a little strange to see you offering me something." Victoria winced. She deserved that. "I'm trying," she admitted. Sophia sat down across from her, studying her carefully. "I believe you," she said, "and that's why I'm here." Victoria lifted her gaze. "Why?" "Because last night you didn't just apologize, you asked to learn." Victoria nodded slowly. "I meant it." "Then let's begin." The first step. Sophia had spent years quietly serving others while using her wealth to change lives in secret. Victoria had spent years chasing status, convinced that power meant being above everyone else. They were opposites in every way. And yet today they sat together, one willing to teach, the other ready to learn. "Tell me, Victoria," Sophia said. "What do you want to do differently?" Victoria exhaled. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Then let's start small." Sophia glanced around the kitchen, the gleaming marble counters, the untouched silverware, the robotic efficiency of everything in its place. "Have you ever cleaned your own home?" she asked. Victoria frowned. "Of course not. Why would I? I pay people for that." Sophia simply smiled. "Then that's where we'll start." Victoria stared. "You're joking." "Not at all," Sophia said. "You want to learn? Then learn from the ground up." Victoria felt a twinge of irritation. This wasn't what she had in mind. But she had asked Sophia to teach her, and now she was being given a choice. She could refuse, fall back into her old ways. Or she could listen. And for once, she chose to listen. "Fine," she said, standing up. "Where do we start?" Sophia beamed. "Let's go outside." Humility in action. The scorching sun beat down on Victoria's expensive silk blouse as she stepped into her massive backyard. Sophia handed her a pair of gardening gloves. "We'll start with something simple," she said. Victoria stared at the dirt beneath her feet. "You want me to garden?" "Not just garden. Care for something. Nurture it. Make it grow." Victoria sighed but pulled on the gloves. For the next 2 hours, she worked in the heat, feeling sweat trickle down her back, a sensation she had never tolerated before. At first, she struggled. She ruined the soil, accidentally crushed delicate leaves, and complained more than she worked. But then, slowly, she began to focus. She stopped worrying about the dirt on her hands, stopped checking her reflection in the window, and for the first time she understood why Sophia did this every day. There was something calming about it, something real, and when she finally finished, standing back to look at her work, she felt something strange, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not in what she owned, not in what she had bought, but in something she had done with her own hands. She turned to Sophia. "Is this why you never left this job?" Victoria asked, her voice quiet. Sophia smiled, brushing the dirt from her hands. It's one of the reasons. Victoria nodded. And for the first time in years, she smiled. A real smile. Not a smirk. Not a calculated expression for the cameras. Just genuine happiness. And it felt good. The journey ahead. The day passed differently than any other Victoria had lived before. Instead of attending business meetings, she learned to cook a simple meal with Sophia. Instead of checking social media, she sat down and had a real conversation about life. Instead of calculating profits, she listened to stories of kindness, of struggles, of people who truly needed help. By the end of the evening, Victoria felt lighter than she ever had. She still had a long way to go. She wasn't suddenly a different person, but she was someone willing to change. And that was enough. As Sophia prepared to leave, Victoria turned to her. "Thank you," she said. Sophia chuckled. "For what?" "For showing me what really matters." Sophia's expression softened. "I didn't show you, Victoria. You were ready to see it." Victoria took a deep breath. "So what's next?" Sophia's smile widened. "Next, we start making a real difference." And with those words, a new journey began. Not for power, not for status, but for something real, for purpose. For the first time in her life, Victoria was ready. Ending message: the true meaning of wealth. Victoria learned that money alone does not define success. It is our actions, our kindness, and the way we treat others that truly shape our legacy. Sophia chose humility. Victoria chose growth. And in the end, they both found something greater than wealth: purpose. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful stories that remind us what truly matters in life.